The Molasses Flood. I know. Sounds like a punchline. It's one American disaster people feel allowed to laugh at. A big tank of pancake syrup pops in Boston. Everybody gets sticky. So let me just hand you three numbers before you laugh too hard. 26 million pounds, 35 miles per hour, and a 6-ton slab of steel thrown 200 feet through the air into a playground. 21 people died. About 150 were hurt. A firehouse was shoved off its foundation with the firemen still inside of it. And the company that built the tank spent the next 6 years standing in a courtroom insisting it wasn't their fault. It was Anarchist. It wasn't Anarchist. I hope you brought snacks. Get ready to ride this timeline. Chapter 1. The Tank. Here's what you have to understand first. Molasses in 1915 was not a pancake topping. It was a war material. Ferment molasses and you get ethanol. Ethanol goes into munitions. And the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, USIA, was making an enormous amount of money supplying it. So in the winter of 1915, USIA put up a tank on the Boston waterfront, 529 Commercial Street, on the edge of North End, 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, designed to hold 2.5 million gallons. The man who oversaw the project was named Arthur P. Gell. He was the company treasurer, not an engineer, not an architect. By his later admission, he could not even read a blueprint. Now, when you finish a steel tank that size, you fill it with water to test it, all the way up. You want to know what happens when the seams are under load. Gell filled it with 6 inches. 6 inches of water in a 50-foot tank. No leaks at the bottom. Good enough. The tank started leaking almost immediately. Not a mystery leak, a visible one. Molasses ran down the outside and pooled at the base. Kids from the neighborhood came down with pails and buckets and took it home. Workers reported it. The tank groaned every time it was filled. People who lived and worked around it said so for years. 1918. USIA's answer was to have the tank painted brown, the same color as what was coming out of it. Chapter 2. 12:30 p.m. January 15, 1919. Strange weather. Boston had come out of a hard, cold snap. A low of 2 degrees the week before. And that afternoon, it was over 40. Partly cloudy, almost pleasant. 2 days earlier, a fresh shipment had gone into the tank. Warm molasses, heated on the ship to make it flow. Pumped in on top of the cold molasses that was already sitting there. That fill brought the tank close to capacity, something that had only happened 4 times in the tank's entire working life. At around 12:30, people in the North End heard a rumble. A lot of them assumed it was a train. That was the rivets popping. The tank came apart. 2.3 million gallons of molasses, roughly 26 million pounds, coming out at once. Molasses is about 40% denser than water. That's the part people get wrong when they hear molasses flood and laugh. This was not slow. It was moving at approximately 35 miles per hour. Now, how tall was it? Here's where the sources argue. The commemorative plaque on the site says 40 foot tall. The Boston Post said 30. Modern analysis puts it around 25 at its peak. I'm going to say 25 because that's the number that comes out of the physics rather than the headline. But understand that even the low estimate is a 2-story wall of it. It drove a section of the tank wall into the girders of the Atlantic Avenue elevated structure. It tipped a streetcar right off its tracks. One 6-ton piece of steel from the tank, including part of the manhole, was thrown 200 feet and landed in a playground. Bridget Cloherty, 65 years old, was on her porch. She didn't survive. 2 10-year-olds, Maria Di Stasio and Pasquale Lantosca, were out in a neighborhood on a warm afternoon. They didn't survive either. At the Engine 31 firehouse, the building was pushed off its foundation and it collapsed in on itself. Firefighters were trapped in a pocket under the wreckage. Crews chopped and dug for hours. George Leahy, 38, was found nearly 4 hours later, pinned under heavy timbers. The next morning, the Boston Post ran on the front page, 11 known dead at midnight, more than 50 injured. That number was gonna grow. Chapter 3. The Rescue. The first organized help came from the water. 116 cadets from the training ship Nantucket ran several blocks. They went straight into it, pulling people out, while others held people back. The police, the Red Cross, the Army, the Navy personnel, they all followed next. Nurses went in up to their knees. Doctors set up makeshift hospitals in nearby buildings, and they worked through the night. Here's the cruel part, the physics. In 2016, a Harvard team ran the numbers and built a scale model of the neighborhood, flooding it with cold corn syrup. Their conclusion? The eyewitness reports of a fast-moving wave were credible. And as the molasses spread out into the January air, it cooled fast and it thickened. So it hit like water and then it set like tar. People who survived the wave couldn't be pulled out. Rescuers searched for days and then they stopped. Caesar Nicolo, a 32-year-old expressman, was recovered from the harbor almost 4 months later. Chapter 4. It was the Anarchist. Now the lawsuit. And this is the part of the story that matters. 119 claims were filed and consolidated into one action against the USIA, one of the first class action suits in Massachusetts history. USIA's defense was sabotage. They argued that the tank had been blown up, in their words, evilly disposed people. And I want to be fair to them for 1 second, because that wasn't invented out of thin air. It was 1919. Italian anarchist bombings were a genuine phenomenon at this point. USIA facilities in New York had been targeted earlier this decade. Someone had called the company and threatened the tank. The context was real, the evidence was not. The Massachusetts Superior Court appointed a court auditor, Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, a lawyer, and a World War I judge advocate. The hearings ran 341 days, roughly 25,000 pages of testimony. Experts from MIT and Harvard were split evenly about what happened on 2 separate sides. Full tank explosion test, replica manholes, built and fractured on purpose. On April 20th, Ogden filed his report. No sabotage, no bomb. The tank failed because it was badly built and never properly tested. The company ignored every warning it had gotten. Modern engineering backs him up. A 2014 structural and metallurgical analysis of the trial evidence found that the fracture started at the rivet hole above the manhole near the base. And that was where the rivet holes had been punched, rather than punched and reamed, almost certainly to save time. Under Boston's own 1915 building law, the allowable stress in the joints were well exceeded. The steel was low in the materials that were supposed to make it strong, and made it brittle in the cold instead. Estimates put it at the brittle to ductile transition temperature as high as 59 degrees. It was 40 degrees that afternoon. The tank was outside of its safe operating temperature, and nobody in the company was qualified to know it. And then there's the money. And here's where the sources argue the hardest. You'll see 3 different numbers depending on where you look. Some sources say Ogden ordered $1 million. Some say USIA ultimately paid out $628,000 across the 120 claims. The engineering analysis that worked straight from the trial transcripts say the award was $300,000. Those may not be contradicting each other. An award and total disbursement aren't the same thing. The number I can trust, $300,000, because it comes from a person reading the actual court record rather than a retelling of it. And here's why that number matters, no matter which way you slice it. The tank had cost USIA $15,000 to build. Families of the dead reportedly received $7,000 each. Chapter 5. What it left behind. Cleanup crews learned that fresh water made it worse and salt water broke down. So they pumped the harbor into the north end and used the sand to soak up the rest. The immediate area took weeks to clean up. Boston Harbor ran brown until summer. But the molasses had already tracked everywhere. Subway platforms, streetcar seats, payphone handsets, people's houses. For a while, everything in Boston was sticky. USIA never rebuilt the tank. Massachusetts and other states responded to Ogden's ruling by tightening construction law. Sign off by licensed architects or engineers, certification, and inspections. The paperwork that we now find annoying exists in part because 21 people died under 26 million pounds of molasses. The site is a public park today. In 2019, on the 100th anniversary, ground-penetrating radar found the tank's concrete base was still sitting 20 inches beneath a Little League baseball diamond. People stood in a circle on the outline of the tank and read the 21 names out loud. And for decades afterward, North Enders swore that on a hot summer day, you could still smell the sweet molasses. And I'm gonna be straight with you. That comment is straight folklore. It's reported, it's repeated, and it's part of the story, but it isn't measured and it's not fact. The rest of it is documented down to the rivet. History is crazy. Subscribe, share, and please leave a comment. Have a wonderful day, guys.